great introduction, isn't it? So today I want to talk about aging successfully and what we can all do to try to age more successfully. But I want to start with sharing with you what I think is maybe the most important lesson I've learned as an adult. It has to do with stress. So if you're like me, you think stress is a negative thing probably, right? How many people try to avoid stress or think of ways they can reduce stress in their lives? Yeah. So it turns out that stress by itself doesn't tell you how happy or healthy you're going to be in your life. A couple of guys named Karasek and Theorel wrote a really interesting book over 20 years ago now, and they looked at occupations, they looked at work, and how you can predict whether someone will be happy and healthy in their work by looking at different things about, the different characteristics about their work. And they looked at stress on one axis, so simplifying a lot. They've looked at a lot of different things. But if you imagine a graph behind me, imagine mapping stress across a horizontal axis. Okay, so high stress jobs fall over here. And on a vertical axis, imagine the amount of control you feel you have in your job. They call it the demand control model. So demand on this axis, control on the vertical axis. So you can imagine a job up in the top right corner for you, like a surgeon, right? Someone who's under really high stress. They have a really high stress job, lots of demands on their work, yet they have a lot of control over how they do their work, right? They get to say how they solve their problems. They have all the tools and the knowledge they need to solve their problems. On the other end of the spectrum, at the bottom end, so if you imagine someone who has high stress but low control, the classic example is someone who works in a manufacturing plant, maybe on an assembly line where you have to put together widgets and you're told exactly how you have to put together those widgets. It doesn't matter if you've thought of a better way to put together those widgets, you have to just put your head down and do the job the way you're told to do it. So you have low control, high demands. It turns out that the series of studies that they did showed very clearly that you could predict someone's health. So someone in the top end, if they had lots of control in their job or autonomy in their job, they would have lower rates of heart disease, they would have lower rates of cortisol in their system, they would have lower rates of alcohol abuse, substance abuse, depression, all sorts of things. They'd be happier overall, versus someone who had low control in their job. So that's true. I think that's a lesson that we need to share with young people in general as they're thinking about what job they want. I think this idea of autonomy is really important to all of us. But I think it applies beyond the workplace. I think it applies to life in general. And as we think about what happens as we grow older, I think imagining the effect it has on our autonomy is really important. And we can all be happier and healthier if we can increase the amount of control we feel in our work. But let me give you an example of how I think right now, unfortunately, we don't always give people the tools and the knowledge they need to feel like they're in control of their lives as they get older. So imagine the scenario where you have an older couple living at home and one of them has some sort of health issue. They've gone into the hospital. Let's say the husband's just had a stroke. He gets treated, he's about to come home. Imagine the challenges that this couple will now face as the husband comes home from the hospital. Imagine how their life is going to change, right? A stroke often results in a balance problem. People often, you lose control of one side of your body. Falls are a really big issue, so likely he will end up using a wheelchair. His wife now has to become his primary caregiver. She probably has no training in how to care for someone. She has to get him up out of bed, into his wheelchair, into the bathroom, onto the toilet, into the bathtub, bathed, dressed, fed, make sure tracking all sorts of medications, side effects, getting to doctor's appointments. It's a really scary time for people. It's a really high-risk time for people coming home after something like that's happened. And if you think about the types of tasks that caregiver has to do, if you compare the way people do it in a hospital, you have two people working together typically in a hospital. You have patient lift equipment so that you're not injuring your back. You've got all sorts of systems in place to support these things. And you've got, on the other hand, at home, you have one person working in this uncontrolled environment where the bathroom is tight and there's not enough space for two people to even stand next to each other while someone's using a toilet. Those types of, you can understand why there's big challenges in those things. So we have to, she has to try to make sure that her husband doesn't fall, right? 1 in 3 seniors will fall once every year. 10 to 20% of those falls result in a serious injury. If you happen to have a hip fracture, it probably means the end of your independence overall, right? If you fall and have a serious injury, you end up in bed a lot, and you deteriorate dramatically once you end up in bed for any period of time. So the flip side of trying to prevent falls is trying to stay as active as you can so that you maintain all of your muscles and your cardiovascular fitness and all those things. But it can be really difficult for older adults to stay active and keep moving. If you think about someone with a disability, it's no surprise. We know that older adults and people with disabilities stop going outside in the winter. Right? We know we're supposed to get exercise, but when there's snow and ice on the ground, how are you supposed to go out safely? So we think there could be, the team that I work on, we try to develop better tools for people to try to keep them active, prevent falls, prevent injuries in caregivers. So thinking about ways we can develop new patient lift equipment, thinking about better wheelchairs and walkers and scooters, things that actually work when you're outdoors so that you don't atrophy and you don't, it's surprising how quickly our bodies start to break down if we spend too long inactive. We know that, when we talk about autonomy, driving is a huge issue, right? We know that our cars become more and more important as we get older. They really become like an assistive device. And yet, there's a point where your doctor, depending on your condition, your doctor may say, I'm sorry, you're no longer able to drive anymore, and take your driver's license away. People talk about losing their driver's license as if it's worse than dying, that losing that autonomy and that freedom. So our team believes that driver's licenses shouldn't be taken away as all or nothing. There could be a graduated delicensing system. So right now we're developing the world's most sophisticated driving simulator so that we can design a method to test drivers objectively to understand if perhaps someone is no longer able to drive at night or on highways but are safe to drive in their neighborhoods to get to the grocery store and get to doctor's appointments and things like that. There's a lot that we can do to give people better tools and knowledge so that older adults, as we all get older, have the ability to be more independent and have more autonomy in everything we do. Disability will touch us all. We know that basically 50% of us, over some point in our lives, we will face a disability. And right now we know that last year about 20% of Canada's population are caregivers. They provide care to someone. You put those two facts together and you see very quickly that almost all of us will either have a disability of our own or care for someone with a disability. If you're very lucky, you end up with both. You end up being a disabled caregiver who needs care, you need care yourself. If you're very lucky, you get a personal support worker for maybe an hour or two a day, but they maybe offload some of the most challenging or most heavy care tasks for you, but you're really, as caregivers, it's really an area that our society neglects, I think. And we know that there's a shift happening, moving people in healthcare overall. Raphael mentioned the cost, looking at the costs of caring for people and the rising costs. To try to reduce those costs, people are now spending less time in hospitals, so people are leaving the hospitals sooner, going home sooner, which is what most people want, but it means that people need more care when they get home. So we have to think about how we're going to support people in these new environments at home with these higher numbers of disabilities. So I think if we all work together, we can develop better tools to help people maintain their independence. I'll end there. Thanks very much.